One punch, one moment of rage, and suddenly RJ Forrester is lying unconscious on the floor of Forrester Creations. And trust me, what led up to that shocking moment is even more dramatic than you might think. RJ Forrester finds himself pulled into a storm of family expectations, complicated romance, and rising tensions between powerful families. What begins as a normal day at Forrester Creations suddenly turns into chaos when an angry confrontation erupts inside the design studio. Accusations fly, emotions explode, and in a shocking instant, RJ is knocked unconscious by a single brutal punch, sending his family racing to the hospital and leaving everyone wondering how things spiraled so far out of control. RJ Forrester has always carried the weight of an enormous legacy on his shoulders. Being the son of Rich Forrester and Brooke Logan means growing up surrounded by power, influence, and constant expectations. The Forrester name is practically royalty in the fashion world, and from the outside it might seem like RJ's path has always been perfectly laid out for him. But lately, RJ has been trying to prove something very important to himself and to everyone else around him. He doesn't want to be seen as just another heir to the family empire. He wants to establish his own identity, make his own mark at Forrester Creations, and show that his talent and hard work speak louder than his last name. Unfortunately, the moment RJ starts stepping forward on his own path, he finds himself walking straight into a dangerous emotional battlefield. Earlier that morning, RJ arrived at the Forrester Creations design studio, ready to focus on work. His goal was simple: finalize the sketches for an upcoming fashion collection. Designing had become his way of expressing himself and proving that he truly belonged in the world his family dominated. But the moment he stepped into the building, something felt off. There was a strange tension in the air. Employees who usually chatted casually in the halls were whispering quietly instead. Small groups stood in corners exchanging worried looks. RJ could sense immediately that something was brewing, and before long, he realized the tension was connected to him. Rumors had already started circulating through the building about a complicated situation involving RJ's personal life. At the center of the drama were tangled emotions involving Electra and Will Spencer. Their complicated relationships had already caused friction among the younger generation of the Forrester and Spencer families, and RJ had somehow ended up caught right in the middle of it all. While sitting at his drafting table, RJ tried his best to ignore the whispers and focus on his designs. His pencil moved across the paper, shaping elegant lines and bold fashion concepts, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the events of the previous night. The night before had been filled with heated conversations and uncomfortable confrontations. Friends had warned him that someone was furious with him, absolutely furious. Apparently, this person believed RJ had crossed a serious line involving matters of the heart. Still, RJ refused to believe the situation would turn violent. In the world of Los Angeles elites, dramatic arguments weren't exactly rare. Families like the Foresters and the Spencers were used to emotional clashes, especially when love triangles and personal betrayals were involved. RJ assumed that sooner or later everyone would calm down, but what he didn't realize was that somewhere else in the city, someone was allowing their anger to spiral completely out of control. Across town, the man who would soon confront RJ was drowning in frustration and jealousy. For days he had replayed the same thoughts over and over in his mind. Every memory of perceived betrayal, every moment of humiliation, every suspicion that RJ had interfered where it didn't belong, it will kept building inside him like a pressure cooker. By the time he stormed into the Forrester Creations building that afternoon, logic had already disappeared. All he wanted was confrontation, answers, maybe even revenge. Back in the design studio, RJ was leaning over his sketches when a sudden sound broke the quiet concentration of the room. The elevator door slammed open down the hallway. The sharp metallic echo carried through the floor like a warning signal. Several employees instinctively looked up from their work. Something about the sound felt aggressive, almost like a storm rolling in. Moments later, the source of the tension appeared in the doorway of the design studio. The man stepped inside with fury written all over his face. People nearby immediately sensed trouble. Conversation stopped mid sentence. Heads turned. The atmosphere shifted instantly as everyone watched the angry figure march straight toward RJ. RJ slowly stood from his drafting table, trying to keep his composure even as he felt the intensity of the situation growing. He raised his hand slightly in a calm gesture and spoke carefully. If you are here to talk, RJ said cautiously, we can talk. There is no need to make a scene. But by that point, reason had already left the building. The confrontation exploded almost immediately. Accusations started flying through the air. The man accused RJ of betrayal, of manipulation, and of interfering in relationships that had nothing to do with him. According to him, RJ had crossed boundaries that should never have been crossed. RJ tried to defend himself. He insisted that he hadn't meant to hurt anyone and that he had only been trying to help resolve a complicated situation. But his explanation only made things worse. Every word RJ spoke seemed to fuel the man's anger even more. His fist clenched tightly as the argument intensified. His breathing grew heavier, and it was clear that his emotions were spiraling out of control. Across the studio, employees watched nervously. Some of them exchanged worried glances. A few discreetly reached for their phones, ready to call security if things escalated. But everything happened too quickly. The argument reached its boiling point in an instant. Without warning, the man lunged forward. His fist shot through the air with shocking speed. And then came the impact. The punch landed squarely against RJ's jaw with a loud crack that echoed through the studio like a gunshot. RJ's head snapped violently to the side as the force of the blow hit him. For a split second, he hooked stunned, almost confused, like his brain couldn't quite process what had just happened. Then his knees gave out. Sheets of design paper scattered across the floor as RJ collapsed backward, hitting the ground with a sickening thud. The entire room froze. For several seconds, no one moved. RJ lay completely still on the studio floor. The attacker stood frozen too, the rage that had fueled him suddenly draining away as reality hit him all at once. Panic began replacing his anger. Had he just gone too far? Across the room, employees finally snapped into action. A few rushed toward RJ and knelt beside him. One employee gently shook his shoulder, trying to wake him. RJ? RJ, can you hear me? There was no response. RJ's eyes remained closed. His body didn't move. The punch had knocked him unconscious. Within moments, the calm atmosphere of Forrester Creations completely collapsed into chaos. Someone shouted for security. Another employee quickly dialed emergency services. Word spread through the building faster than anyone could control. Upstairs in the executive offices, the news reached Rich Forrester when Rich heard that his son had been knocked unconscious. He didn't hesitate for even a second. He rushed downstairs immediately, his heart pounding with fear. Rich had faced business crises, personal betrayals, and family drama countless times in his life. But seeing his own son lying motionless on the design studio floor was something entirely different. RJ? Rich shouted as he pushed through the crowd. He dropped to his knees beside his son, gently lifting RJ's head and desperately searching for signs that he might wake up. What happened here? Rich demanded, his voice trembling with both anger and fear. Employees quickly began explaining the argument and the sudden violent punch that had taken everyone by surprise. As the story unfolded, Ridge's expression hardened with fury. Whoever had done this would have to answer for it. Soon the distant sound of sirens filled the air outside the building. Paramedics arrived quickly and immediately began examining RJ. Ridge hovered close beside them, refusing to move even a step away from his son. They checked RJ's pulse, examined his breathing, and shined a light into his eyes. Finally, one of the paramedics looked up at Ridge. His breathing, the paramedics said reassuringly, but we are taking him to the hospital to rule out any serious head injury. Those words offered some comfort, but not nearly enough. RJ was clearly placed onto a stretcher, and as the paramedics wheeled him toward the elevator, Reach followed right beside them, his mind racing with fear and anger. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the tension only continued to grow. RJ was rushed into emergency department while Reach immediately called Brooke Logan to tell her what had happened. Brooke was horrified when she heard the news. Within minutes, she was racing toward the hospital, praying that her son would be okay. As the story spread through the Forrester and Logan families, relatives and friends quickly gathered in the hospital waiting area. Desperate for updates, when Brooke finally arrived, she ran straight into Regis's arms, tears streaming down her face. Is RJ going to be alright? She asked anxiously. Rich didn't have an answer yet. Inside the examination room, doctors worked carefully to evaluate RJ's injuries. Even though the attack had been only a single punch, head injuries can be unpredictable and dangerous. They ordered scans and neurological tests to check for concussion symptoms, internal bleeding, or any other potential complications outside the room. Emotions ran high. Some family members blamed the attacker completely, insisting there was absolutely no excuse for violence. Others pointed out that tensions had been building for weeks because of misunderstandings and emotional conflicts. But for Reed and Brooke, none of these arguments mattered at all. Their only concern was RJ. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a doctor walked into the waiting area. Everyone stood up at once. The doctor delivered the news. The good news is that RJ is beginning to regain consciousness. He explained he likely suffered a concussion, but there are no signs of life threatening injury. The room filled with relief. But even as that wave of relief spread through the family, everyone understood something important. The consequences of that punch weren't going to disappear overnight. The attack had exposed deep cracks within the relationships between the Forrester and Spencer families. And as RJ slowly opened his eyes in the hospital bed, one thing became painfully clear. That single violent moment was only the beginning of a much larger storm. This moment could have massive consequences moving forward. The punch didn't just knock RJ unconscious, it shattered the fragile balance between two powerful families. When something like this happens, it's never just about the physical injury. It becomes personal, emotional, and even political within the family dynamics. Rich is fiercely protective of his children, and seeing Archie attacked inside the family company is going to ignite serious conflict. Brooke will almost certainly demand accountability, and the Foresters may not let this go easily. At the same time, the complicated romantic tensions that started this whole situation are still unresolved. What this really does is raise the stakes dramatically. One impulsive act of violence has the potential to trigger a chain reaction of revenge, blame, and emotional fallout that could change several relationships forever. Honestly, moments like this are exactly why this storyline is so gripping. RJ has been trying to step out of the shadow of his powerful parents and prove he can stand on his own. But instead of recognition for his work and ambition, he's suddenly dealing with betrayal, emotional chaos, and now physical violence. And that's what makes this situation feel so intense. RJ didn't walk into the studio expecting a fight. He walked in ready to work, ready to build his future. Instead, he ended up in the hospital. It really shows how dangerous unresolved emotions and jealousy can become when people stop thinking clearly. In the world of high fashion, powerful families, and complicated love triangles, one explosive moment can change everything. R.J. Forrester's shocking attack has already sent shockwaves through the Forrester and Logan families, and it's clear the fallout is only just beginning. Now, the real question is what happens next? Will RJ recover and confront the person who attacked him? Will Rich demand justice? And could this incident spark an even bigger war between the families? I want to hear what you think. Who do you believe is really responsible for what happened to RJ? And how do you think this conflict will unfold moving forward? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next dramatic twist.